In this video series, we've talked to Kathy, John, and Yaxi, who approach food fraud from different angles. We can test, regulate, and report, but how can we strengthen food fraud investigations?
I think we have to improve overall supply chain integrity. And what I mean there, underpinning the integrity is transparency and trust. And it's much broader than just the food authenticity or food fraud itself. It also covers the environmental, social, and governance, or the ESG factors. So how was the product produced? Who produced it, under what conditions, and so on. So we need to get more transparency on those key components, because I've done research in, for example, the palm oil countries, and some of the things that go on there I don't want to mention on this call today, but they're just generally not good things that happen. And then Canadian companies may source palm oil believing that it's RSPO, when in fact a lot of these companies were given about 14 years for compliance. In the meantime, they chopped down a lot of trees. So for me, the authenticity of the product is in a broader context of supply chain integrity, and it covers the ESG factors. But I want to go back to what Kathy mentioned, that they have a model that they look at, and I have a model as well that I built into the food fraud report from Arrow Institute last year. Make sure that we're very clear on the deterrence, the regulatory deterrence. Make sure we're very clear on which testing can identify the food fraud, and then to be able to prosecute. Again, as Kathy pointed out, there's a nuance here based on the severity. There may be a monetary penalty, or there may be something more serious. So there's a lot of, I think, flexibility that CFIA have to bring down the hammer, likely or very strongly, on offenders. So I think those three things, we can dip it by deterring, identifying, and prosecuting, and broadcasting that.
We've seen supply chains, but what do we mean by supply ecosystems?
So what I mean by that is that if regulatory requirements are for one up, one down, then there may not be a sufficient incentive for organizations to invest in innovation. So, and one of the research projects that happened adjacent to work that I was doing advising APEC was looking at the services chain within APEC members. And they looked at Chile, so the country Chile, and they looked at bringing wine to market. So just one product, bringing it to market. And they identified 70 different services that are required to bring it to market. 20 were done internally, 21 were semi-outsourced, and 29 were fully outsourced. So when I talk about the difference between a supply chain and a supply ecosystem, I'm really talking about building systems that are enabled or empowered by digital technologies, where we can change that notion of a linear supply chain, where we only do one up, one down. And if I ship a product to you, Sarah, I don't know who you ship it to. So we lack visibility in the supply chain. But if we change that notion and replace it with DLT technology, or blockchain as an example, which is one of the use cases within DLT, then we move from this notion of a linear supply chain where we lack visibility to something like a bicycle wheel. And in the middle of the bicycle wheel, you have that hub, that technology, that digital hub, that digital ecosystem. And then the spokes on the bicycle represent the raw material providers and all of the service providers. And the reason I'm saying this is that when we think about doing a product, we only think about recalling the physical product itself, but we also need to be able to rapidly recall the services that were done. You know, who did the pest control? Who did the agronomy work? Who did the food safety certification? And if we have that bicycle wheel type context, then we can rapidly identify what I call, and what senders call, the authoritative source. In other words, we're not relying on a brand to put a certification that they got from a third party into the system. The third party puts the certification into the system. And that way, with DLT technology, even if the document is false, you have data provenance back to that organization that put the document into the system. So if CFIA inspects something and they go, there's something wrong here, we can rapidly go back and see who put that document into the system, and then try to mitigate the risk. So building integrity in the supply chain, we need to have that ecosystem approach. Definitely our father's supply chain is an outdated concept. There is currently no requirement in the food industry for serialization, like in pharmaceuticals, for example, and other sectors like tobacco. But the benefits for organizations and for regulators is when an organization decides to put a standards-based QR code with a unique serialized identifier, so that number that you have in the barcode, that will always remain the product identity. But then you have this second serialized identifier, and that can give you what's called a digital chain of custody. So Sarah, if I send you 1,000 products, traditionally it was only using the GTIN, the global trade item number that's in the barcode. But now if I send you 1,000 products and I have a serialized identifier in that, and I send also to Yaxi 1,000 products with the same, and then they were only for distribution in Canada, east and west of Canada. And then I get a call from a regulator in Australia saying, we found this product here in Australia, and it's on recall, and you have to do the formal recall. We can see, based on the 1,000 IDs that I shipped to both of you, which supply chain was at fault. So I may go back to Yaxi and say, I shipped this product to you. Let's look at your records, and let's look at your distributors or your channels to market. So digital technology is becoming more and more important. And that notion that I mentioned earlier about the authoritative source is absolutely critical. In other words, we should not be getting documents or certificates from custodian sources, someone that just holds it. We have to go back to the primary source of that product, the authoritative source. And similarly, if I have a product in Canada that's halal certified or kosher certified, and I have a mobile app, and I scan the barcode and I click on the actual halal certification, that should go to the halal certification body in Canada, not to the brand. This is how digital can help us to develop more integrity in our systems. And there are tools out there, and we're looking at various tools. Like one of them is from a company that's called Origin Trail, and I'm the chairman of the Trace Alliance, just as a disclaimer here. But that's a free open source platform that many companies can use, and we're looking at using that in Canada and elsewhere as well, because it facilitates just that data sharing layer in a very structured way.
There are a lot of people and groups interested in addressing food fraud. I asked our panel what they'd like to see in the future.
Yeah, so I'll still answer this question from the perspective of analytical methods for food fraud detection. So currently, the analytical methods being used are mostly based on large size instruments that are only available to central laboratories. So the detection costs are too high to test a large number of products, and most of the methods are very labor intensive. So it will be great if more portable or even handheld or disposable testing methods as simple as pregnancy testing strips can be available for analyzing the food fraud, so that in that case, consumers can test their products at home, and then consumers can ensure they're eating what they really wanted to eat.
I'm going to give a two-part response to this, because I remember that the Elliot report from Professor Chris Elliot in response to the horse meat scandal gives us a nice framework to work with. 8 pillars of a framework, and I won't go through them, but I'll just name them out. The first one is always consumer first, always consumer first. The second is zero tolerance for the bad guys. Intelligence gathering is the third pillar. Laboratory services, and as Yaxi pointed out, making sure there's more availability and affordability of the services is vital. Audit through the supply chain is the fifth pillar. Government support is the sixth. Leadership and crisis management. But on top of those pillars, and I'd recommend people look at the Elliot report. Chris did a fantastic job at pulling that together. But there may be an audience member called Professor John Spink, my good friend John. And John always says that when you have an analytical science base or a food safety or a food fraud conference, there's not many social scientists in the room. And I agree with John. He often actually asks the audience of 100 or 1,000, and he gets, less than 5. I think most of the time it could be a little bit more, but very few people. are actually the social scientists. So in order to address food fraud, and in order to address it more broadly, we need the ologists around the table. So we need the criminologists, we need the psychologists, we need the anthropologists, we need the sociologists. We need to understand why food fraud occurs in the first place. We can't just run with our science and our white coats on and chase our tails. So I think in Canada, this is the approach that we need as well as in many other countries.
When everybody really understands and has taken on their responsibility, be it consumers, industry, academics, government, and we're all contributing to food that's safe and accurately represented. But the last question was really interesting because there's a lot of future promise in application of innovations in technology, and I think that food fraud communication, prevention, detection, and deterrence is going to be well enhanced by the use of technology. We're starting to see some interesting work at the international level on food fraud itself and areas where we can work together to come up with principles and procedures for mitigating it, but also about the use of technology and innovation in labeling. And that is a whole different opportunity to get information to consumers. And it's that information that they need to make informed choices, but also that could add integrity into the system for them. So future of food fraud, I think it's when we're able to share information amongst us and able to plan together to really do some complex, complex activities that deal with a very complex world, a very complex space. Of course, recognizing the importance of privacy of information and confidentiality. It's still the importance of being to act in an area that is, as I said, very complex.
Food fraud is difficult to detect, and our supply systems are growing more complex. Fraud in one product can cascade into a bigger problem. It will take different perspectives, strategies, and innovations to address the risks of food fraud. This video series and the original webinar highlights the types of conversations between regulators, researchers, and industry professionals that are important to address the risks of food fraud. Our panelists commented on the need for consumer awareness, and now we pass the conversation on to you. Find more information in the description below, and don't forget to like and share our videos. Thanks for watching.